G'day so-and-sos and welcome to my sewing room. If we haven't met before, my name is Cathy and in today's video I wanted to give you my top 5 tips for working with vinyl. Now I'm a bag maker, so I love using vinyl, and there are so many different types of vinyl and we have to treat it a little bit differently depending on the properties of it. But there are things that you can do that can make life a lot easier when using it. So let's start at looking at some different types of vinyl. Now, all of these vinyls have different properties to them that we sort of have to take into account when we are sewing. But don't worry, I'll go through all of that at the sewing machine in a moment. But have a look at this one, for example. It's quite textured. So it's got those sort of bumps on it. It's really fun to use. It looks so pretty. And it's a little bit sticky. Now, I don't mean sticky like the kids have gotten hold of it and put their little fingers all over it. I mean sticky like it sort of grabs, almost plasticky. And then we have this one. Now, this one is sort of the same in that it's sticky, but it's completely smooth and oh so sparkly. I just love it. And it's a lot thinner. And it's got like a sort of woven cotton back, where that one has a felt back. So they're things that we need to take into account as well. And then I have these couple of ones. These I got from Spotlight in Australia, and they are just vinyls that, you know, you sort of use for everyday type of stuff. I think they're more sort of, they're for sewing and bag making, but also for upholstery and stuff like that. So this one in particular has stretch to it, and the stretch goes that way, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we have this one that's also from Spotlight, so it doesn't have as much stretch to it, but again it's quite thin and has a woven back. And then hi Lucifer. And then this one is quite a smooth one. This is from Ella Jewel, who I just love if you've seen any of my other videos, and it has a felt back to it, so it's really quite easy to sew with if you're a beginner. Let's talk about stretch, Lucifer. So tip number 1 is stretch. So not all vinyl has stretch, but a lot of it does, because vinyl's made for different things. It can be made for upholstery, home furnishings, bag making, jewelry making, bow making, all types of things. So some of it does have stretch. So when you're at the shop, you want to have a little pull of it. See this one, the stretch goes that way. You want to have a little pull of it and see which way the stretch goes. This one's also got a fair bit diagonally. So when you pick your vinyl, when you're figuring out how much you need to take that stretch into account. Because if your stretch is going across and you go, well, cool, I can cut my strap if I'm bag making, I can cut my long strap and my long gusset over that way, you might not want to do that because that's the direction that the stretch goes. You actually want to cut it that way. So you'll need to buy a lot more of it than what you might actually think. So when I cut this one, I cut it against the stretch. So when I have my nice long strap and I pull it, it's not stretching. So that is tip number 1, to make sure that you don't cut with the stretch, that you cut against the stretch. Okay, so tip number 2 is your needle. If you're using vinyl, you need to use the right needle for the job. You don't want to use a ballpoint needle, for example, that's designed for sewing stretch fabric. You want a needle that has a nice sharp tip to punch through it. You'll also want to put a heavier weight needle into your machine. Now, domestic sewing machines, and it doesn't matter if you're on domestic, you can still sew with vinyl if you do the right things and your machine is, designed to be geared for a little bit heavier fabrics. So your domestic needles will usually come with something written on the packet like, light fabric or medium fabric or denim fabric, but they'll always have a weight with them as well, which is generally 70, 80, 90, maybe up to 100 for domestic sewing machines. You really want to be using around a 90, depending on the type of vinyl that you're using. And if you're going through a few layers, then you want to go even heavier. Generally, if you can't see the weight on there anywhere, if you can't figure it out, if you go for one that says jeans, then that should be right. Or some of them might even say leather. So that's what you want to be going with. So that's our needle. Oh, and you always want to make sure when you're starting a new project to put in a new needle so everything's nice and sharp and there's no burrs. Now the next thing, number 3, will be the type of foot that you're using. So you can see this one is like a blue plastic. It's called a Teflon foot, and it's designed to go over, like not stick to the fabric, to be able to glide over it a little bit better, where a metal foot on vinyl will be grabby and just won't slide over, and it won't feed through your feed dogs evenly because it's grabbing on the top of your fabric. So if you can't find any Teflon feet from your machine, or you don't think the company actually makes them for your machine, you can actually buy Teflon tape that you buy in a little roll and you can put on the bottom of your existing feet. So if you have a metal foot that you really like, then you can just put this tape on the bottom of it and it will behave in the same way as a Teflon foot. So that is, what are we up to? 1, 2, 3. Okay, number 4 is your stitch length when you are sewing with vinyl, especially as you start doubling it over and start punching through more layers, and your stitches want to get a little bit tighter as you do that. Just your machine will naturally sort of do them a bit tighter, I mean. So you want to lengthen your stitch length when you are sewing on top of vinyl. And that works for us anyway, because when we're sewing on top of vinyl, we're top stitching. We're, doing the outside of the bag or the upholstery or the, horse tack or whatever that we're making. So we lengthen our stitch length. I've got this on almost a 5 at the moment. And when we lengthen our stitch length, it just stops it from going tight and from stretching. But like I said, we want to make sure that we're cutting our vinyl against the stretch as well. Okay, tip number 5, always go in the same direction. So what I mean by that is, if I'm sewing here and pretend I'm making a strap and I'm going down here, say that's the bottom of my strap. I don't want to then just zip all the way over and go back up this side. What I want to do is backstitch a little there, take my work out, and then start at the same end. And by doing that, I'm minimizing any sort of twisting or stretch that might occur. So if you're watching this video, you might be doing so in order to learn how to make, like I said, bags or horse tack or upholstery for cars or boats or that type of thing. So let me just show you. This is a Singer 141G industrial machine, and it's designed for heavier type of stuff. So if this is the sort of work that you want to get into and you want to be using a lot of vinyl and, sewing through a lot of layers, you really want to think about getting an industrial machine like this one, because it can just go through so many layers with very minimal changes in your stitches. So if we have a look at that, like my stitches are still very nice and neat, and I've got 4 layers there. So if I fold it over that way, then we're up to 8 layers. And we'll have a look at those stitches. So you want the right machine for the job. Now, I'm not trying to discourage you if you have a domestic machine, because you can for sure still use a domestic machine and do a couple of layers of vinyl. But if you want to do stuff where you're getting up to, where you're having multiple layers of vinyl, then think about getting yourself an industrial machine, because they just handle so much more than what you'll be able to do on a domestic machine. So on that layer, I did skip a few stitches, but I have a 90 weight needle in there, and I just sewed through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 layers of that vinyl. If I changed up to a heavier needle, I'm confident that those stitches, skip stitches, wouldn't happen. But that is a great example of why we need to make sure that we've got a heavier needle in our machine, because even if your needle will go through your fabric, if it's not heavy enough, you'll get those skipped stitches where you have a couple of short ones and then long ones. So there you go. There's my top 5 tips for sewing with vinyl. Now, like I said, please don't be discouraged if you have a domestic machine. It'll just be a matter of figuring out what your machine's limits are. But if you do things like use a Teflon foot, cut your vinyl the correct way, use a heavier needle and a longer stitch, then your machine might actually be a lot more capable of doing things than what you initially thought it might be. Okay, guys, that's it for me today. Remember, it's only fabric. We can always buy more. Okay, have a good one. Bye. Bugger.